At her own engagement party, the crowd laughs at the shy baker in the blue dress, until a cold, rich king of the city steps in, stops the mockery, and claims her with one line. He offers a protection marriage, a steel and glass fortress, and a kitchen built for her hands. But the moment she says yes, the war starts. A secret ledger from her late father, a leak inside his closest circle, and fake photos that try to turn him against her. An ambush under a bridge, a kiss on a balcony for the cameras, and a whisper that feels too real. By dawn, a safety drill at the docks is actually a trap, and only the new bride can cut the fuse before everything explodes. Now the city is watching. Is she a pawn or a queen? Is he saving her or using her? When the truth hits daylight, will this dangerous marriage crown them both or burn them alive? Through tinted windows, Verity watched the city lights blur past, her heart hammering against her ribs. The silver cake, her masterpiece, abandoned at a party meant to celebrate her future, now just another reminder of how quickly life could change. She smoothed her pale blue dress, the fabric cool under trembling fingers. Kane sat opposite her, his presence filling the spacious interior with quiet intensity. His dark suit absorbed shadows, making him seem carved from night itself, but his eyes never left her face, watchful and assessing. "Your father's ledgers," he said, breaking the silence. "They contain more than just bakery accounts, don't they?" Verity's throat tightened. Dad never told me details, just that he'd seen things in his accounting work. Wrong things. She squared her shoulders, refusing to shrink under his scrutiny. A week after he reported it, his accident happened. Kane's jaw ticked. "And your ex's family thought marrying you would give them access." It wasn't a question. "I thought Thomas loved me." The admission tasted bitter. "Stupid, right? The fat baker girl actually believed—" She cut herself off, hating how her voice cracked. "Stop!" Kane's command was soft but absolute. "Your size isn't relevant to their corruption, or to my offer." The limo glided through the financial district, past gleaming towers that scraped the night sky. Each street brought them closer to Viscari House. Verity's new cage, or sanctuary, she wasn't sure which. 72 hours, she said, testing the words. "You want me to design and execute a charity gala menu in 3 days. A ghost of a smile touched Kane's mouth. "I want you to show exactly what you can do when given real resources. No budget limits, full creative control. And all I have to do is marry you temporarily." The question came out sharper than intended. "The marriage protects both of us," Kane replied. "It invalidates their claim on you and gives my lawyers time to handle the annulment properly. Meanwhile, you'll have a legitimate business opportunity to establish yourself." Through the window, Verity spotted the distinctive silhouette of Viscari House rising ahead, 60 stories of steel and glass, its upper floors wrapped in clouds. Her pulse quickened. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have ignored what happened back there. Let me deal with my own mess." Kane studied her for a long moment. "Because you handled yourself with dignity while they showed none. Because you're clearly talented, but they were going to waste that talent. And because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I recognize someone who's been underestimated their whole life." The limo slowed, turning into a private underground entrance. Verity's fingers twisted in her lap. "I won't be anyone's puppet," she said quietly. "Not theirs, not yours." Good. Kane's approval was immediate. "I need a partner who thinks for herself, not a pawn." The vehicle came to a smooth stop. Through the dividing glass, Verity glimpsed armed security personnel taking positions. She forced herself to breathe slowly, steadily. "Your suite is ready," Kane said. "My housekeeper laid out everything you might need tonight. Tomorrow we'll send for your personal items." "Just like that? You had this all planned?" "I suspected Thomas's family would try something tonight. I didn't know exactly what, but I had contingencies ready." He shifted slightly. "I protect what's mine, Verity, even before they're officially mine." The possessive note in his voice sent a shiver down her spine, not entirely from fear. Before she could respond, the door opened, letting in the cool underground air. Kane stepped out first, then turned to offer his hand. Verity hesitated only a second before placing her fingers in his. His grip was warm, steady, anchoring her as she emerged from the limo. The parking level was immaculate, more like a luxury hotel lobby than a garage. Armed men stood at strategic points, their presence both reassuring and unnerving. An elegant older woman in a housekeeping uniform waited near the private elevator. Mrs. Chen will show you to your suite, Kane said. I have some business to conclude tonight, but we'll discuss details over breakfast. 9 o'clock? Verity nodded, gathering her courage. I'll need to see the kitchen facilities first thing. If you really want this gala menu in 72 hours, we can't waste time. Something like approval flickered in Kane's eyes. Mrs. Chen will give you access codes to everything you need. The kitchen is yours. The housekeeper stepped forward with a gentle smile, gesturing toward the elevator. Verity moved to follow, then paused, looking back at Kane. Thank you, she said softly, for stopping them, whatever your reasons. His expression remained neutral, but his dark eyes held hers. Get some rest, little baker. Tomorrow we begin. The elevator doors closed smoothly, whisking Verity upward into her new life. Mrs. Chen chatted quietly about the suite's amenities, but Verity's mind whirled with calculations, ingredient lists, timing schedules, equipment, needs. If she focused on the work, maybe she could ignore the way her skin still tingled where Kane had touched her hand. Maybe she could pretend this was just business, just temporary protection, just a chance to prove herself. Maybe she could ignore how her heart raced every time he looked at her like she was something precious to protect. The elevator ascended silently through Vescari House, its mirrored walls reflecting Verity's pale blue dress infinitely. Mrs. Chen's gentle presence beside her was a stark contrast to the armed men they'd left below. The corridors were a maze of gleaming surfaces and subtle security, cameras disguised as art pieces, biometric scanners masquerading as modern wall fixtures. Everything spoke of money and power, but with understated elegance rather than flash. A tall, impeccably dressed man waited at the end of the hall. Miss Cole, he said, bowing slightly. I am Armand, the house major domo. Welcome to Vescari House. He extended a silver keycard, and Verity's breath caught. Her name was already engraved on its surface in elegant script. Your suite is prepared, Armand continued smoothly. For security purposes, you'll be accompanied by Eliseo when moving through the house. He gestured to a watchful man standing nearby, whose quiet nod acknowledged his role. The kitchen is currently off limits until morning, while contractors complete equipment installation. And please note that all phone communications are logged for safety. Verity's fingers tightened around the keycard. I need to call my mother. She'll be worried. Of course, you can use the secure line in your suite. The call was brief and carefully worded. Mom, I'm safe. I can't explain everything now, but I'm okay. I'll call again tomorrow. Her mother's relief was palpable, though questions lingered unasked. Afterward, Armand led her to Kane's study, a glass-walled space with views of the city's glittering skyline. Kane stood at the window, his reflection overlaid on the nighttime panorama. Comfortable? He asked as she entered. As much as I can be, given the circumstances. Verity settled into a leather chair, smoothing her dress. You mentioned terms? Kane turned, all business now. Monday morning, City Hall. We make this legal immediately to cut off your ex's leverage. You'll need to make some public appearances with me through the gala. Unity is important right now, and I need your help identifying any irregularities in your father's old accounting. There's a leak somewhere, and those records might help locate it. Verity lifted her chin. I have conditions, too. Something like approval flickered in his eyes. Go on. No humiliation. No matter what this arrangement is, you don't mock me or let others do it. No isolation. I keep my friends, my work contacts. And in the kitchen, I have final say. It's my reputation on the line with this gala menu. Agreed, Kane said without hesitation. Anything else? Before Verity could answer, a subtle chime sounded. Kane's expression hardened as he checked his phone. Garage sensor, he said tersely. Come with me. Shouldn't I stay here? You need to see this. His tone left no room for argument. The elevator ride down was tense. When the doors opened, Verity saw organized chaos. Security personnel moving with practiced efficiency, weapons ready but controlled. In the center of it all stood a man she didn't recognize, restrained but still struggling. Kane approached him with predatory grace. Who sent you? Kane's voice was soft, almost gentle. The contrast with his coiled tension made it more frightening. The intruder spat words in Italian. Kane's response was a barely perceptible gesture to his men. They moved like parts of a single machine, efficiently subduing the stranger without a sound. Check his phone, Kane ordered. Full sweep of the garage. I want to know how he got this far. Verity watched, frozen, as Kane orchestrated the response. No shouting, no dramatic threats, just quiet, lethal competence. Yet when he turned to her, his touch on her elbow was impossibly gentle. "Are you all right?" She nodded, understanding now. This was who he was, dangerous to his enemies, careful with those under his protection. The distinction was clear as glass. "Take her up," Kane told Eliseo. "Full security protocol tonight." In her suite, Verity found herself standing at the window, watching the city lights blur through tears she refused to let fall. A soft knock announced Armand with tea. "Mr. Viscari asked me to inform you that the intruder has been dealt with," he said diplomatically. "Your security detail is doubled tonight." Verity wrapped her hands around the warm teacup. "Will you tell him? Tell him I'll stay. For the weekend, under protection. But we do this my way too." Armand's smile was knowing. "Of course, Miss Cole. Will you need anything else tonight?" She shook her head, glancing at the elegant clock on the wall. 1:10 a.m. "Just some sleep." After Armand left, Verity explored her third-floor suite. The bedroom was larger than her entire apartment, with a view of the financial district's towers. The closet held designer clothes in her size. The bathroom gleamed with marble and chrome. Everything spoke of preparation, of expectations. Kane had been ready for this night, had anticipated her needs. It should have frightened her, this level of planning. Instead, she found herself oddly comforted. She changed into silk pajamas that fit perfectly, sliding between sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Outside her door, she knew Eliseo kept watch. Somewhere above, Kane managed the aftermath of the intruder's capture. Protection and danger, luxury and violence, tenderness and control, all wrapped up in one impossible package. As exhaustion pulled her towards sleep, Verity wondered if she'd made the right choice. But she'd seen Kane's face when he looked at her, heard the steel in his voice when he claimed her. Whatever game he was playing, whatever danger lurked in the shadows, she was under his protection now. For better or worse, she'd chosen her path. Morning would show where it led. The morning sun glinted off the river, painting golden patterns on Verity's walls when she opened her eyes at 7:20 a.m. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The silk sheets and panoramic views so different from her modest apartment. Then reality crashed back. The engagement party, Kane's intervention, the intruder in the garage. A cream envelope sat on the nightstand beside a garment bag. Inside, she found a note in precise handwriting. "Test the kitchen. Make it yours. K." The garment bag contained a chef's coat, pristine white, with Vicole embroidered in silver thread. The fabric was butter soft, expertly tailored to her curves. No standard-issue uniform here. Verity dressed quickly, pinning her hair back and sliding her feet into the comfortable clogs she'd insisted on bringing. The elevator hummed quietly as it carried her down to the kitchen level. The space took her breath away. Gleaming stainless steel workstations, a professional-grade mixer that probably cost more than her car, and an oven setup that would make any pastry chef weep. At her station, every tool she could want waited in perfect alignment. Her hands trembled slightly as she tied her apron. Too much change, too fast. But baking she knew. She pulled ingredients for cardamom crullers, losing herself in the familiar rhythm of measuring and mixing. Staff members drifted in and out as she worked. Security personnel, housekeepers, administrative assistants. She caught their wary glances, the way they assessed her presence in their domain. But she also noticed how they relaxed when she remembered names, asked about their coffee preferences, offered warm pastries with a genuine smile, the kitchen filled with the scent of fried dough and spices. Verity was glazing the last batch when Kane appeared, dress shirt rolled to his elbows, no jacket in sight. "May I?" he asked, reaching for a cruller. She nodded, watching as he took a bite. His eyes closed briefly in appreciation. "Walk with me," he said, brushing sugar from his fingers. "The gardens are pleasant this time of morning." Outside, the air was crisp. Gravel crunched under their feet as they followed a winding path between carefully tended flower beds. "You have a full day ahead," Kane said. "The dressmaker arrives at noon for fittings. At 4, we'll do a complete run-through for the gala, and at 8, you'll join me for dinner with my inner council." Verity's step faltered. "Your council?" "They need to see you as more than a pawn in play. Your presence matters." She squared her shoulders. If she had to prove herself, she'd do it through competence and observation. It was how she'd built her business from scratch, watching, learning, adapting. The dressmaker arrived precisely at noon, wheeling racks of sample gowns. Verity gravitated toward clean lines that complemented her figure rather than hiding it. No more apologizing for her curves. She noticed Kane watching as she tried on a midnight blue sheath dress. When she shifted, trying to breathe deeply against the tight bodice, he spoke quietly to the tailor in Italian. The woman nodded, making notes about comfort panels and strategic seaming. The council dinner began promptly at 8 in a private dining room. 4 men sat with Kane at the head of the table, his senior lieutenants, each controlling different aspects of the organization. Kellen Drago caught her attention immediately. His welcome seemed warmest, his smile practiced and perfect. But something felt off. The warmth never quite reached his eyes. When his phone buzzed partway through the meal, Verity caught the slight tick in his jaw as he read the message. She filed the detail away, along with other observations. How the youngest lieutenant deferred to Kane's opinion, how the oldest watched everyone's wine consumption, how conversation flowed around certain topics like water around rocks. At 10:40 p.m., Verity returned to her suite. She pulled up the leather journal she'd brought from home and began writing everything she'd noticed: staff interactions, council dynamics, Kellen's momentary tension. Tomorrow she'd start on her father's ledgers, looking for whatever anomalies had drawn Kane's attention. Setting her alarm for 6 a.m., she tried to quiet her racing thoughts. Sunday would bring the gala rehearsal and more pieces of this puzzle she'd stepped into. For now, she needed rest. The city lights twinkled beyond her window, a constellation of urban stars. Somewhere in that glittering landscape, forces were moving against Kane, against them both now. But here in this fortress of steel and glass, surrounded by security and the lingering scent of cardamom, Verity found herself feeling oddly secure. She hadn't asked for any of this: the protection marriage, the political maneuvering, the weight of Kane's world settling onto her shoulders. But she'd chosen it over the humiliation her ex had planned. Now she'd make that choice mean something. Her father had taught her to face challenges head on, to trust her instincts when numbers didn't add up. Those lessons would serve her well here, where every interaction carried layers of meaning, and even a dinner party was a strategic move. The journal's pages held her first map of this new territory. Names, connections, subtle tensions noted in her neat handwriting. She'd build on it tomorrow, adding whatever the ledgers revealed. Verity closed the journal and placed it in the bedside drawer. Outside her door, she heard the quiet movement of security changing shifts. The routine of it was almost soothing now. At 6:05 a.m., sunlight barely touched the kitchen windows as Verity lifted the heavy flour bin she'd insisted on bringing from her old bakery. Something about its weight had always felt off. Now, running her fingers along the inside, she found what she'd subconsciously suspected: a false bottom, cleverly disguised. Her hands trembled as she pried it loose. There, nestled in a plastic sleeve, was a thumb drive with her father's precise handwriting: insurance. 20 minutes later, she stood in Kane's study, watching his tech chief hook up security protocols before plugging in the drive. Kane's presence behind her was solid, grounding. The screen filled with spreadsheets, her father's trademark precise notation system. But these weren't bakery records. These were shipping manifests, payment logs, and most damning of all, a careful record of meetings between Salvatore Quinto's people and someone inside the Vescari organization. Here, Verity pointed, her finger tracing a pattern. These payments align perfectly with your Atlantic route schedules. Someone's been selling your timetables. Kane's mouth hardened to a brutal line. He dismissed his tech chief with a slight nod. "Keep this between us," he said quietly once they were alone, "until I can verify the extent." He moved to a wall panel, pressed something that made it slide aside. "In exchange, let me show you what we're really doing with this gala." The blueprint he revealed was elaborate. Not just a charity event, but a carefully orchestrated trap. Every detail, from the restricted delivery windows to the specific vendor requirements, was designed to control access points and force their leak to show their hand. "Elegant," Verity murmured, appreciating the strategy. The afternoon found them at the Opera House, where the gala would be held. Sunlight streamed through massive windows as staff transformed the space, according to Kane's exacting specifications. Verity had arranged her tasting station with military precision. Each sample perfectly plated, every garnish placed just so. She'd chosen sophisticated flavor combinations: dark chocolate with sea salt and lavender, pistachio cream with honey and cardamom, citrus tarts with fresh herbs. The donor committee, mostly society matrons who'd initially viewed her with barely concealed disdain, gathered around her display. Verity noticed how their expressions shifted from skeptical to impressed as they tasted each offering. "The complexity of flavors," one woman murmured. "Such attention to detail," another agreed. While Verity managed the front-of-house politics, she caught glimpses of Kane moving through the space like a chess master, placing his pieces with careful intent. Security positions were adjusted, sight lines evaluated, staff rotations subtly modified. During a brief lull, they found themselves alone on the balcony overlooking the river. The late afternoon light painted everything in soft gold. "Tell me something," Kane said, his voice low. "What do you want that has nothing to do with survival? No safety concerns, no strategic value, just want." Verity was quiet for a long moment, watching boats cut white lines through the water. Below. "A flagship bakery," she finally said. "Not just any bakery. One that employs women society's written off, the ones who need second chances, who deserve better than they've been given." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's probably naive." "It's perfect," Kane cut in. His eyes had gone intense. "It's exactly what you should want." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then shouts from below shattered it. Paparazzi had spotted them. "Miss Cole, how does it feel to be the token plus-size trophy? Are you worried about fitting into a wedding dress?" Verity's spine stiffened, but before she could respond, Kane's hand settled at the small of her back. The touch was possessive, protective. "My future wife," he said, voice carrying easily to the photographers below, "brings more value to this organization than your entire careers combined. Her mind is as exceptional as her beauty. I suggest you remember that before your publications find themselves facing unfortunate circulation problems." The threat was delivered with such elegant precision that it took a moment to register as a threat at all. By then, the photographers were already backing away. The rest of the rehearsal passed in a blur of final adjustments and vendor confirmations. It was 9:15 p.m. when they finally returned to Viscari House, both drained from the long day. They paused outside Verity's door, the air between them charged with unspoken things. Kane's presence seemed to fill the corridor, making it hard to breathe normally. His eyes traced her face as if memorizing details. 10 tomorrow morning, he said finally, for the civil ceremony. Verity nodded, her pulse jumping. And then back here to finish gala preparations. Yes. He seemed about to say more, then simply inclined his head. Sleep well, Verity. She slipped into her room, leaning against the closed door. Through it, she heard his measured steps retreating down the hall. The space where he'd stood still felt warm, like a ghost of his presence lingered. The day had shifted something between them. She'd seen past his careful control to glimpses of the man beneath, in the way he'd listened to her dream of the bakery, in the fierce protection he'd offered against the photographer's barbs. And she'd shown him more of herself than she'd planned, revealed wants she'd barely acknowledged to herself. Tomorrow would make their arrangement legal. But today had made it feel real in ways that had nothing to do with papers or ceremonies. Steam rose from Kane's coffee cup as he studied security routes spread across the kitchen island. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows, turning the steel appliances to gold. The light caught the edges of the blueprints, highlighting his meticulous annotations in red ink. At the other end of the counter, Verity nursed her own coffee, a fortress of quiet before the day ahead. The delicate china cup warmed her palms as she breathed in the rich aroma, savoring these peaceful moments. The north entrance needs tighter rotation, Kane murmured, marking the blueprint with precise strokes. His shirt sleeves were rolled to reveal strong forearms, his collar open at the throat. A faint shadow of stubble darkened his jaw, evidence of the early hour. Despite being awake since dawn, he radiated contained energy, his posture alert and focused. His fingers moved with deliberate grace across the paper, each mark purposeful. Verity watched him work, appreciating the efficiency of his movements. The way his brow furrowed slightly when he concentrated reminded her of a master craftsman. She'd chosen a simple cream dress for City Hall, fitted but comfortable, with subtle detailing at the neckline that flattered without drawing attention. Her hair was swept into a sleek twist that made her feel polished, capable. She'd applied her makeup with extra care today, not for vanity, but for armor, a professional mask to face whatever the day might bring. "Do you think the paperwork will take long?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Her voice was steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. Kane looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers across the marble expanse. "No. The clerk is expecting us. Should be straightforward." His voice was low, reassuring in its certainty. At precisely 10 a.m., they entered City Hall's marble rotunda. Light filtered through high windows, creating pools of brightness on the floor that illuminated specks of dust dancing in the air. The space echoed with hushed voices and distant footsteps, the sounds bouncing off the domed ceiling. Two of Kane's most trusted men, Marco and Dominic, flanked them as witnesses, their presence both protective and ceremonial. Marco's dark suit was impeccably tailored, while Dominic's watchful eyes continuously scanned their surroundings. The clerk's office was utilitarian, all fluorescent lights and filing cabinets. A desk fan hummed in the corner, stirring papers and bringing slight relief from the stuffiness. Kane produced the paperwork with characteristic thoroughness, each document neatly arranged in a leather portfolio. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, processed everything with efficient disinterest. They signed where indicated, pens scratching against official paper, exchanged plain platinum bands that somehow felt weightier than their minimalist design suggested. The cool metal slid onto Verity's finger with unexpected ease, as if it had been waiting for this moment. No vows were exchanged. This was business, after all. The clerk's monotone congratulations fell flat in the sterile room. But when their eyes met over the signed certificate, something electric passed between them. A whole conversation without words. Acknowledgement of the stakes, recognition of trust given and received, awareness of how this arrangement was becoming something neither had anticipated. Verity's breath caught in her throat. As Kane's thumb brushed over her knuckles, a touch so brief she might have imagined it. The opera house hummed with pre-gala energy when they arrived. Staff bustled about, adjusting floral arrangements and polishing glassware under crystal chandeliers. The grand space smelled of fresh flowers, furniture polish, and anticipation. Verity immediately took command of her domain, directing the placement of dessert stations with military precision. Her clipboard became both shield and scepter as she moved through the space. Her natural authority emerged as she guided staff through final preparations, her soft voice carrying unexpected weight. The chocolate fountain needs to be centered exactly, she instructed, demonstrating the proper flow rate with a practiced hand. The dark chocolate cascaded in perfect ribbons, glossy and tempting. And make sure there's enough clearance around the berry display. We want easy access, but no jostling. The strawberries bruise easily. She adjusted a platter of perfectly ripened fruit, arranging them to catch the light. Kane observed from the shadows of a balcony, watching how she balanced firm expectations with genuine warmth. The elegant curve of her neck bent as she inspected a tray of pastries, her fingers making minute adjustments to their placement. Staff who'd been tense gradually relaxed under her leadership, responding to her clear vision and unfailing courtesy. A young server dropped a tray of glasses, and Kane noticed how Verity quickly helped clean up, her reassuring words visibly calming the mortified employee. Evening descended, and the gala transformed the opera house into a glittering wonderland. Chandeliers cast prismatic light across the crowd, while string quartet music floated through the air. Women in jewel-toned gowns and men in crisp tuxedos created a kaleidoscope of wealth and influence. Verity's dessert stations drew constant attention, her sophisticated flavor combinations and artistic presentations earning praise from even the most jaded socialites. Each confection was a tiny masterpiece, balancing texture, flavor, and visual appeal. "The orange cardamom pavlova is divine," declared a shipping magnate's wife, helping herself to seconds, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she reached for the delicate dessert. "Where did Viscari find you? You're a revelation, my dear." Meanwhile, Kane worked the room with calculated charm, testing communication channels designed to expose their leak. His security team moved through practice patterns, watching for anomalies, each man positioned to cover specific zones. He maintained constant awareness of Verity's location, even while engaging city officials in seemingly casual conversation. His laughter never quite reached his eyes, which remained vigilant beneath their sociable facade. Verity had just finished adjusting a display of chocolate truffles, each one hand-painted with edible gold, when camera flashes erupted on the western balcony. The sudden burst of light momentarily blinded her. She'd stepped out for air, the cool night breeze a welcome respite from the heat of the kitchen, only to find herself cornered by aggressive paparazzi. Their cameras clicked rapidly, voices overlapping as they shouted questions. A prominent donor, red-faced from champagne with sweat beading along his hairline, reached for her arm as if she were an exotic specimen on display. "Let's see the ring properly, wee-wees," he insisted, his grip too familiar, fingers pressing into the soft flesh of her forearm. His breath reeked of expensive liquor and entitlement. "Show us what caught a Viscari's eye. What's a little thing like you doing with the city's most dangerous bachelor? There must be something special." His words carried just enough innuendo to make her stomach clench. Before Verity could respond, Kane materialized beside her. His presence seemed to fill the space, making the donor stumble back. The air around him practically crackled with contained fury, though his face remained impassive. Calculating the cameras, the watching crowd, the necessity of controlling the narrative, Kane turned to Verity. His eyes asked a silent question, seeking permission even as he moved with deliberate intent. His kiss was perfectly calibrated for public consumption, long enough to satisfy every lens, passionate enough to silence doubters. His hand cradled the back of her neck with surprising gentleness, fingers threading into the hair at her nape. But against her lips he whispered her name like a secret prayer, meant for her alone. The intimacy of it made her knees weak, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found her hands gripping his lapels, steadying herself against the unexpected rush of sensation. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne toasts and careful conversation. Verity moved through her duties on autopilot, hyper-aware of Kane's presence across the room, the phantom pressure of his lips still tingling on hers. She smiled and accepted congratulations, explained flavor profiles to curious guests, all while her mind replayed that moment on the balcony in an endless loop. The weight of her new ring felt suddenly significant, a tangible reminder of how quickly this charade was becoming complicated. At 1:05 a.m., she finally closed her suite door at Viscari House, pressing her forehead against the cool wood. The sound of her heartbeat seemed unnaturally loud in the silence of her room. Her feet ached from hours in heels, and fatigue pulled at her muscles, but her heart wouldn't stop racing. The kiss had been strategic, she knew that. A power move to protect her, to cement their story. But the way he'd said her name, breath warm against her lips, had felt like a confession of something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. She changed into silk pajamas, the material sliding cool against her skin, removed her makeup with practiced strokes, let down her hair from its confining pins. Her scalp tingled with relief as she brushed through the tangles. But sleep proved elusive. She lay awake until 2 a.m., replaying the moment on the balcony, analyzing every nuance, the pressure of his hand at her waist, the momentary hesitation before his lips met hers, the slight roughness of his stubble against her skin. When exhaustion finally pulled her under, her dreams were restless, filled with phantom touches and unspoken words, corridors that led nowhere, and doors that wouldn't open. 4 hours later, her phone would chime with an unexpected alert from the kitchen cameras. But for now, she drifted in that liminal space between sleeping and waking, where truth and desire blurred like watercolors, where intentions dissolved into feelings she wasn't ready to name. The sheets tangled around her legs as she turned, seeking comfort that remained just beyond reach. The ring on her finger caught moonlight from the window, casting tiny prisms on her wall. Such a small thing to represent such a massive change. She touched it gently, tracing its perfect circle, remembering the weight of Kane's gaze when he'd slipped it on her finger. His touch had been careful, almost reverent, at odds with his reputation for ruthless precision. For something that was supposed to be just business, it felt increasingly like anything but. The platinum band gleamed in the darkness, a promise, or perhaps a warning, of things to come. The motion alert chirped at precisely 6:10 a.m., jerking Verity from her restless sleep. She blinked at her phone screen, frowning at the notification from the pantry's security system. After throwing on her robe, she padded down to the kitchen, her security shadow Eliseo falling into step behind her. The industrial kitchen gleamed in the pale morning light. Everything looked pristine at first glance, exactly as they'd left it after the gala. But something nagged at her organizational instincts. She headed straight for the specialty ingredients cabinet, where artisanal sugars and rare spices were kept under lock and key. The Tahitian vanilla sugar, she murmured, noting how the bag sat just slightly askew on its shelf. It was positioned differently during setup. She pulled out her phone and checked the timestamps. The bag had been moved during a specific window between 11:45 p.m. and midnight, when the gala was in full swing. A detail that might seem insignificant to others, but to someone who'd grown up watching her father track shipping irregularities, it was a red flag. Kane was already in the breakfast room when she arrived, reading reports on his tablet. He looked up as she entered, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "The sugar inventory doesn't match the restock schedule," she explained, laying out her findings. "The timing aligns perfectly with those payment patterns in my father's ledgers." Kane's jaw tightened as he cross-referenced the information with vehicle logs on his tablet. Only 3 people had both: security clearance for the pantry and knowledge of the gala layout. His voice was controlled, but she caught the dangerous undercurrent. "Kellen, Marcus, and Andre." Kellen seemed too polished at dinner the other night, Verity offered carefully. Like he was performing loyalty instead of living it. Kane nodded once, already typing instructions to his security team. Within minutes, surveillance teams were dispatched to shadow all 3 suspects. Needing to steady herself, Verity spent the afternoon in her domain. The kitchen was her sanctuary, where precise measurements and careful timing created order from chaos. She lost herself in the familiar rhythm of tempering chocolate and whipping cream to perfect peaks. Elena, the youngest member of the pastry team, watched with obvious admiration as Verity demonstrated proper ganache technique. The key is temperature control, Verity explained, showing how to check the cream's heat with the inside of her wrist. Too hot and the chocolate will separate. Too cool and it won't emulsify properly. Elena's face lit up when her first attempt came out glossy and smooth. I've never gotten it this perfect before. You have good instincts, Verity assured her. You just needed the right method. As evening approached, Verity conducted final tastings for an upcoming donor lunch. The kitchen staff moved around her with growing confidence, the atmosphere warm with shared purpose. Kane found her as she was finishing, his presence filling the doorway. Walk with me. He led her to a small chapel off the West Hall, its stained glass windows casting colored shadows in the dying light. The space felt frozen in time, heavy with silence and old prayers. My mother, Kane said quietly, studying the play of light across the stone floor, was a master of delegation. She never got her hands dirty, just pointed and others did the wet work. It kept her clean in everyone's eyes, while those under her carried the weight of her choices. Verity listened, understanding this was a rare glimpse behind his walls. When I took over, I made a vow, he continued. Every hard choice would be mine to make and mine to execute. No outsourcing the ugly parts of power. His eyes met hers, intense and conflicted. It's a vow I've kept, until now, because keeping you safe means asking others to handle certain tasks. The weight of his admission settled between them. Verity understood what it cost him to bend his own rules, to trust others with her protection. Late that night, as she returned from a final kitchen check, something white caught her eye. An envelope had been slipped under her door. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside were photographs, professional quality, clearly doctored, showing what appeared to be her meeting with Salvatore Quinto months ago. Her stomach dropped as she studied them. The manipulation was skilled, but she could spot the telltale signs of digital alteration around the edges. The hall clock chimed 11 p.m. as she gathered the photos and hurried to Kane's study. His expression darkened as he examined them. We'll have the lab start forensic analysis first thing tomorrow, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. 7:30 a.m. Sharp. Verity nodded, her mind already racing ahead to what these photos meant. Someone was trying to frame her as the leak, attempting to drive a wedge between her and Kane. But why? And more importantly, who had access to both high-end photo editing software and detailed knowledge of her movements? The pieces were there. She could feel it. Like an imperfect ganache, the elements weren't quite coming together yet. But with the right temperature, the right pressure, the truth would eventually emerge, smooth and clear and impossible to deny. Kane's hand brushed her shoulder, grounding her racing thoughts. We'll find who did this, he promised, his voice soft but lethal. And they'll learn exactly what happens to anyone who threatens what's mine. The lab's harsh fluorescent lights cast sharp shadows as Kane's tech chief, Roman, clicked through analysis screens. Verity's hands were clenched in her lap, her stomach twisting as they waited. Definitely deep fakes, Roman confirmed at exactly 7:30 a.m., pointing to telltale digital artifacts. Professional work, but rushed. They pulled source images from public events and social media, then composited them. He traced pixelation patterns around the edges. Distributed through a shell account, registered to a defunct cleaning service. Kane's jaw tightened as he studied the forensics report. Timeline. Photos were created within the last 72 hours. Whoever did this wanted to move fast. Verity's stomach dropped as the intended effect became clear. The fake photos showing her with Quinto were meant to isolate her, to make Kane doubt her loyalty just as she was proving useful. The timing wasn't coincidental. Keep digging, Kane ordered. I want to know every server these touched. By noon, with the investigation running in the background, Kane insisted they maintain normal routines to avoid revealing their knowledge. That meant proceeding with a scheduled supply run to Verity's old bakery to collect the last of her belongings. Just a quick in and out, Eliseo briefed the security team. 2 SUVs, 1 van, standard formation. Verity changed into practical clothes, dark jeans, flat boots, a sweater that wouldn't restrict movement. The weight of recent events pressed against her shoulders as she descended to the garage where the convoy waited. The drive started smoothly enough. Eliseo rode with her in the middle vehicle, a reinforced van with tinted windows. The late autumn sky hung low and watchful overhead as they wound through familiar streets. At her old bakery, now shuttered and silent, Verity efficiently gathered what she needed: a crate of carefully labeled tins passed down from her grandmother, and a framed photo of her father that had watched over the kitchen for years. His smile in the image was proud but tired, as if he'd known even then what burden his ledgers would become. 2-minute warning, Eliseo murmured into his radio as they loaded the van. Rolling out. They were 8 minutes into the return trip when everything changed. The convoy had just entered the shadows beneath the Harrison Street overpass when the first shots cracked through the air. Down! Eliseo shoved Verity to the floor as bullets pinged off reinforced metal. Through the chaos, she glimpsed men with rifles appearing from behind concrete pillars. Eliseo's voice was clipped as he radioed a distress code while returning fire through a gun port. Red Crown, overpass compromise, multiple hostiles. Verity pressed herself against the cold metal floor, counting her breaths to stay calm. The van's armor held, but the impacts reverberated through her bones. Outside, engines roared and tires squealed as the other vehicles maneuvered. 6 endless minutes passed in a blur of gunfire and shouted commands. Then a new engine sound cut through the chaos, the distinctive growl of Kane's personal vehicle. He emerged like a blade unsheathed, his movements precise and lethal. Through the van's tinted windows, Verity watched him orchestrate the counter-assault with terrifying efficiency. His men moved as extensions of his will, cutting down the attackers with surgical brutality, while he personally ensured no shots came near the van where she sheltered. When the last echo faded, leaving only engine idle and the acrid scent of cordite, Kane yanked open the van's door. His eyes found her immediately, scanning for injuries. His face was composed, but his hands trembled slightly as he helped her out. Not from fear, she realized, but from the nearness of losing her. Smoke curled around their ankles as she steadied herself against him. The overpass had become a tableau of aftermath, spent brass glinting on asphalt, disabled vehicles, moaning attackers being zip-tied by Kane's men. Verity reached up to cup Kane's face between her palms, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm not made of glass," she told him firmly. "I won't break." His expression shifted, something dangerous and devoted burning in his gaze. "Anyone who reaches for you bleeds," he vowed, his voice a raw rasp against her skin. The drive back to Viscari House was tense, but controlled. They arrived at 3:10 p.m., shaken but alive. Kane immediately ordered full medical checks and tactical debriefs for everyone involved. The next hours blurred together as they pieced together the attack. The ambush team had detailed convoy information, another sign of an internal leak. Doctors confirmed no serious injuries among Kane's men. Eliseo gave a precise account of each moment while medics cleaned a graze on his arm. Verity insisted on baking while she gave her statement, the familiar motions helping her hands stay steady as she described everything she'd observed. Kane moved between briefings like a coiled spring, coordinating with his intelligence team and strengthening security protocols. At 6 p.m., with the immediate crisis contained but questions still swirling, Kane ordered a complete lockdown of Viscari House for the night. No one in or out except his most trusted lieutenants. Guards doubled at every access point. The fortress battened down like a ship preparing for storm. In the kitchen, Verity studied her father's photograph, now safely hanging on her new wall. His eyes seemed to hold secrets still. Even from here, she touched the frame gently, remembering his lessons about attention to detail, about how the smallest discrepancy could reveal the largest betrayal. Somewhere in this puzzle of ledgers and shell companies and ambushes, a pattern waited to be found. She just had to keep her eyes open and her mind clear enough to see it. The chapel's stained glass cast jeweled shadows across the stone floor as Verity slipped inside at 9:30 p.m. Kane stood near the altar, his shoulders a rigid line against the dim light. He didn't turn, but she knew he sensed her presence. The day's violence hung between them like smoke. Verity moved quietly down the aisle, her footsteps echoing in the sacred hush. When she reached the front pew, she sat, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "I've spent my whole life being treated as a joke," she said softly, her voice steady despite the admission's weight. "The girl too big for love, too naive for desire. Every time someone showed interest, it came with mockery attached, a trap waiting to spring." Kane turned then, his face half in shadow. The chapel's filtered light touched his cheekbones like benediction. He moved with deliberate care to sit beside her, close but not touching. "What they did to you was cruelty masked as courtship," he said, his voice low and certain. I want the opposite of humiliation for you. Want that crowns, not cuts. Desire that builds, never breaks. Verity's breath caught at the raw honesty in his tone. And if I don't know how to trust that kind of want, then we write our own rules, at your pace. His hands remained carefully at his sides, though she could feel the restraint vibrating through him. I won't touch you without clarity between us. No games, no power plays. The air hummed with possibility. Desire held in check, not from coldness, but from respect. The control he showed was more intoxicating than any reckless passion could have been. They sat in companionable silence as the chapel's peace wrapped around them. Verity studied the play of colored light across the stone floor, thinking how different this felt from every other time a man had shown interest in her. No sly comments about her size, no backhanded compliments, no subtle undermining of her worth. When midnight approached, they walked together to the darkened kitchen. The space felt different at night, intimate, private. Verity's domain transformed into neutral ground, where they could meet as equals. She reached for Kane's hand with deliberate slowness and placed it at her waist. His fingers flexed once, then held steady. I want to write those rules together, she said. Not just about touch, but about trust. About how we navigate this world you've brought me into. Yes. The word carried weight beyond its single syllable. A contract. A promise. They moved through the kitchen like dancers learning new steps. Kane showed her the security panels hidden behind innocuous panels, teaching her the emergency protocols. She demonstrated the precision of her craft, explaining how temperature and timing could make or break a delicate ganache. The night deepened around them as they shared these pieces of themselves. Every revealed detail felt like a gift, freely given rather than a weakness exposed. At 3:10 a.m., they settled in the study with coffee and work. Verity spread her father's ledgers across the desk while Kane reviewed patrol reports. The familiar rhythm of numbers helped ground her as she traced payment patterns. Something clicked in her mind as she compared dates. Her finger traced a series of entries, matching Quinto's payment spikes against port manifests. Each spike aligned perfectly with canceled inspections, ones that required internal authorization. Kane, she said quietly, look at this. She showed him how 3 specific dates lined up, large deposits from shell companies traced to Quinto, followed by inspection cancellations signed with an internal code. A code that only 3 senior staff members could use. Her heart beat faster as she cross-referenced more dates. The pattern held. Every major security breach corresponded to documents marked with the same authorizing initials. At 3:40 a.m., Verity's hand shook slightly as she circled KD in red ink. Kellen Drago's signature, appearing again and again at crucial moments. She wasn't ready to voice what those letters might mean, what betrayal they could represent. Kane studied the evidence without speaking, his expression unreadable. The weight of possibility pressed against them both. Finally, he closed the ledger with careful precision. 2 hours, he said. We sleep for 2 hours, then reconvene at 6 to verify this against the historical manifests. Verity nodded, gathering her notes with meticulous care. She needed those 2 hours to process what they'd found, and what it might cost them all. The night felt heavy, with unspoken implications as they walked to their respective rooms. Kane's hand brushed hers once, a touch that carried both promise and warning. Whatever they discovered at 6 would change everything. In her room, Verity set her alarm with steady fingers. The facts aligned too perfectly to ignore, but she needed sleep before facing their full impact. She lay down, fully clothed, mind racing with numbers and codes and the memory of Kane's controlled strength in the chapel. Outside her window, the city lights blurred against the river's dark surface. In 2 hours, they would know if her pattern analysis proved what they feared. For now, she allowed herself these moments of quiet, holding the night's earlier tenderness close against whatever morning might bring. At precisely 6:05 a.m. Thursday, Verity and Kane hunched over stacks of shipping manifests in his study. Each document they examined tightened the noose around Kellen Drago's neck. The pattern was undeniable. His authorization code appeared on every compromised shipment. Here, Verity said, pointing to another entry. Transit window sold for cash through a shell corporation, same signature. Kane's expression turned to ice as he absorbed the evidence. His oldest ally had been selling them out piece by piece, using his position to create invisible gaps in security. Each document they checked only confirmed the betrayal. Prepare for quiet extraction, Kane instructed his security chief through the intercom. No alerts, no warnings. But before they could set the trap, their phones buzzed simultaneously. The deepfake photos had gone nuclear, splashed across 2 tabloid websites, and flooding through a private donor chat group. The fabricated images showed Verity in clandestine meetings with Quinto, each one dated months before she'd ever met Kane. By 10:30 a.m., Kane's council chamber vibrated with barely contained chaos. Senior members demanded immediate action, their voices sharp with false concern. "She needs protection," Kellen insisted, his practiced warmth perfectly calibrated. "A safe house outside the city, just until this blows over." Verity recognized the play for what it was. Exile wrapped in security theater. They wanted her gone, discredited, unable to expose the rot she'd discovered. She watched Kane's jaw tighten as he fielded demands from all sides. She wouldn't be the reason he hesitated, wouldn't let herself become the weakness that gave Kellen time to strike. Moving quietly, she penned a note in her precise baker's hand. "Trust the numbers." Eliseo met her at the service entrance, face grim but understanding. He'd already brought a car around. No GPS, nothing traceable. They slipped away while the council meeting continued, heading for an accountant's office she trusted in the business district. Hours passed in a blur of spreadsheets and encryption keys. Verity's fingers flew across the keyboard, following patterns her father had taught her. Each layer of code revealed new connections. At 5:20 p.m., the final piece clicked. Hidden in the seemingly routine safety inspection schedule was a plan for dawn attack on Kane's legitimate shipping yard. Kellen had disguised it as a standard safety drill, the perfect cover for sabotage. Verity grabbed her phone, expecting to leave a voicemail. Kane answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" His voice was tight with controlled worry. "Safe, but we have bigger problems." She outlined the attack plan rapidly. "They're hitting the yard at dawn, disguised as inspectors." "Stay where you are," Kane ordered. "I'm moving now." Verity ended the call and stared at Eliseo. "I can't just sit here." He nodded once, already reaching for his keys. "Spare trucks in the underground lot, but we do this smart." By 6 p.m., they were rolling through rush hour traffic in an unmarked maintenance vehicle. Verity had changed into dark work clothes, her hair hidden under a cap. The toolbox at her feet contained wire cutters and other supplies, everything needed to disable detonators without leaving traces. "If we can't stop them setting up, we cut the fuse lines," she explained, checking her watch. "Night shift changes at 6:45. That's our window." Traffic crawled along the bridge. Eliseo navigated with ruthless efficiency, but the congestion was brutal. Verity used the time to memorize the yard's layout from her phone. Loading bays, access points, likely spots for device placement. "Kane will have backup coming," Eliseo said quietly. "But they'll be watching for his people," Verity replied. Not a baker and her shadow in a maintenance truck. The river stretched dark beside them, city lights reflecting off its surface. Verity thought about Kane in his study that morning, how still he'd gone when the betrayal became clear. She wouldn't let Kellen destroy what Kane had built. They passed another crawling mile. Verity checked her burner phone. No messages, as expected. Kane would be moving his own pieces now, but she couldn't wait for his strategy to unfold. Sometimes the simplest solutions came from unexpected directions. 5 minutes to the yard, Eliseo reported. Verity nodded, double-checking her supplies. Wire cutters, voltage meter, work gloves. Simple tools for a complex problem. But she knew about precision and timing, about how small adjustments could prevent disaster. The yard's lights appeared ahead, stark against the darkening sky. Somewhere in those stacks of containers, Kellen's people would be placing their charges, confident that no one had decoded their schedule. But they hadn't counted on a baker's attention to detail or her father's careful documentation. Hadn't expected her to recognize the pattern hidden in routine inspection papers. As they approached the security gate, Verity squared her shoulders. She knew exactly what she was walking into, knew the risks, but she also knew that sometimes the most effective defense was to simply break the mechanism before it could trigger. The guard waved them through after a cursory check of their maintenance credentials. Eliseo steered them toward the far loading bays, where the inspection team would likely start their work. Rush hour traffic had eaten 35 minutes of their drive time. The clock read 6:40 p.m., 5 minutes until shift change would provide their cover. Verity took a slow breath, centered herself like she did before complex sugar work. Time to cut some fuses. The maintenance truck rolled to a stop at 6:48 p.m. as dusk settled over the shipping yard. Through the windshield, Verity spotted figures moving between containers, their reflective vests a perfect cover for something far deadlier than a safety check. 3 by the east gate, Eliseo murmured, 2 more near the generator housing. Verity adjusted her maintenance cap and grabbed the clipboard she'd prepared. Years of early morning bakery deliveries had taught her the power of confident paperwork and a purposeful walk. She approached the guard booth, steps sure and steady. "Night shift inspection," she said, flashing the work order. "Got a report about faulty wiring in Bay 4. The guard barely glanced at the papers, already distracted by his upcoming shift change. Verity's heart thundered against her ribs as they cleared the gate. She counted containers, matching them to her memorized layout, while Eliseo guided the truck toward the auxiliary power station. "Now," she whispered when they were parallel to the generator fence. Eliseo gunned the engine. Metal screamed against metal as their truck plowed through the chain link barrier. Sparks flew from severed cables, and emergency lights flickered out across half the yard. In the sudden darkness, remote detonator signals would be useless. Sirens split the air. Verity ducked as flashlights swept the grounds. Through the chaos, she glimpsed Kane's teams converging from both north and south, their movements precise and coordinated. Body cameras glinted on tactical vests. Everything would be documented. "Stay low," Eliseo ordered, pulling her behind a container as footsteps pounded past. At 7:02 p.m., floodlights blazed to life, powered by Kane's mobile units. The harsh beams caught Kellen standing beside a stack of shipping containers, his practiced smile gone brittle at the edges. Kane emerged from the shadows like a blade unsheathed, every step measured. "Really, brother?" Kane's voice carried across the yard. "This is how you choose to end it? You were supposed to be at the council meeting." Kellen's hand twitched toward his jacket. "Where you could control the narrative, like those deep fakes of my wife?" Movement caught Verity's eye. 2 young yard workers huddled behind pallets, terror plain on their faces. They'd bolt any second, straight into the line of fire. She crouched and crawled toward them, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "Hey," she whispered. "I'm Verity. Focus on my voice, okay?" Short, shallow breaths. The younger one, barely 20, was hyperventilating. Verity demonstrated the breathing pattern, exaggerating her calm until they matched her rhythm. Above them, Kane and Kellen circled each other like wolves. "How long?" Kane demanded. "How many shipments did you divert?" "You were never supposed to notice," Kellen spat. "Too busy playing legitimate businessman. While you sold us out to Quinto? Fed him our roots? Someone had to keep things profitable." The strike came faster than Verity could track. Kane's hand. Shooting out, Kellen's gun skittering across concrete. The fight that followed was brutal and efficient. Kane drove Kellen to his knees with mechanical precision, cuffs clicking shut around betrayal. "You'll breathe," Kane told his former friend as teams secured the scene. "You'll confess, and then you'll wish I'd been less merciful." By 8:15 p.m., police lights painted the yard in red and blue. Evidence markers dotted the ground where Kellen's team had staged their devices. Press fans clustered at the perimeter, hungry for the story of thwarted sabotage and family betrayal. Verity stood at Kane's shoulder as cameras flashed, her presence deliberate and undeniable. No more hiding, no more doubt about her place. His hand settled at the small of her back, warm through her work clothes. They stayed until every detail was documented, every statement recorded. At 10 p.m., they finally climbed into the same SUV for the ride home. Kane's fingers found hers in the space between them, intertwining with quiet certainty. "The confession goes public at 7 tomorrow," he said softly. Verity squeezed his hand. "Family council at 9? To formalize the purge." His thumb traced her knuckles. "Anyone who backed Kellen goes." The city lights blurred past their window. Verity thought about patterns, in ledgers, in betrayals, in the way Kane's grip anchored her even as the day's adrenaline began to fade. She'd chosen to trust him that first night in the limo. Now, watching his profile in the passing streetlights, she knew she'd choose him again. Eliseo followed in a second vehicle, maintaining their security envelope. The night shift at Viscari House would be waiting with reports and updates. But for now, in the quiet of their shared car, Verity let herself breathe. Let herself feel the weight of what they'd prevented, what they'd proved. The SUV wound through familiar streets, carrying them home. Kane's thumb kept its steady rhythm against her skin, a tactile reminder that they'd faced this threat together, that she'd chosen action over hiding, trust over fear. They passed the overpass where the ambush had happened just yesterday, had it really been only yesterday. The memory of Kane's hands trembling as he checked her for injuries felt distant now, replaced by the surety of his grip on hers. Verity watched the river roll past, dark water reflecting city lights like scattered stars. The evidence was secured, the betrayal documented. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but they'd face them as they had tonight, together with clear eyes and steady hands. Friday dawned clear and cold as Kane's team released Kellen's confession across selected media outlets at exactly 7 a.m. The video spread like wildfire, Kellen's drawn face filling screens as he detailed every betrayal, every diverted shipment, every dollar funneled to Quinto's accounts. The deepfake scheme unraveled thread by thread as he explained how they'd doctored photos to isolate Verity. By 8:15 a.m., donors who'd wavered were flooding Kane's office with messages of support. Tabloids that had trumpeted scandal just yesterday scrambled to revise their headlines. Verity watched it unfold from Kane's study, sipping coffee, as his press team coordinated responses. "Ready?" Kane asked at 8:45 a.m., adjusting his cufflinks. She smoothed her navy dress, chosen for authority, not decoration. "Let's clean house." The council chamber at 9 a.m. hummed with tension. Kane took his place at the head of the long table, Verity at his right hand. The compromised captains shifted in their seats, already smelling blood in the water. Kane didn't waste time. "Gentlemen, the evidence speaks for itself." One by one, he named those who'd backed Kellen's play. Security appeared silently behind each marked man. No shouting, no drama, just clean excision of rot. In their place, Kane elevated lieutenants who'd proven steady under pressure. "The legitimate businesses need stronger oversight," Kane continued. "To that end, I'm naming Verity as full partner in our hospitality division, with authority over all restaurant and event operations." Murmurs rippled around the table. Not surprise, they'd seen her command the gala. But recognition. She'd earned this with competence, not marriage. At 11:45 a.m., they headed to the courthouse. News vans clustered around the steps where Quinto was due to appear for a hearing on port safety violations. Kane timed their arrival perfectly, stepping from the car just as Quinto emerged with his lawyers. "Salvatore!" Kane called, voice carrying across the plaza. "Let's discuss business practices." Quinto's face twisted. "This is harassment. This is evidence." Kane gestured to the massive screen his team had mounted on a nearby building. Footage from the shipping yard began to play. Body cameras, security feeds, all perfectly clear. "Doctored!" Quinto blustered, but his voice wavered as time stamps and GPS data scrolled past. "The receipts don't lie," Kane replied coolly. "Neither do bank records." Verity watched Quinto's swagger crumble as the proof mounted. His lawyers huddled, whispering urgently. Around them, phones captured every second of his public undoing. At 2:15 p.m., Kane's phone buzzed. He read the message, jaw tightening, then showed Verity the screen. The toxicology report on her father's death had cleared, revealing traces of a signature poison, the same compound used in 3 other deaths linked to Quinto's organization. "He'll pay," Kane promised softly. "Legally, publicly, completely." By 3 p.m., the district attorney's office announced new motions based on the evidence. Quinto's allies began distancing themselves, making careful statements about alleged misconduct and pending investigation. The empire he'd built on threats and favors started crumbling. Verity spent the afternoon in her kitchen, centered by the rhythm of baking, as news updates pinged on her phone. She prepared comfort. Foods, warm bread, delicate pastries, hearty casseroles, for the staff who'd weathered this storm with them. At sunset, Kane gathered the household in the main hall. Security teams, kitchen staff, cleaners, gardeners, everyone who kept Viscari House running. Verity stood beside him, flour still dusting her apron. "Yesterday could have ended differently," Kane began. "Lives were saved because Verity acted. She saw the pattern, made the choice, took the risk." Verity stepped forward. "And you all trusted me in your kitchen, your halls, your home. That trust matters." The applause started slowly, then swelled. Relief and celebration tangled together. These people had seen empires rise and fall. They knew what victory looked like. After, they walked the quiet halls together, shoulders brushing. Kane's presence felt different now. Still dangerous, but with edges gentled just for her. At 11:30 p.m., they reached her door. He cupped her face with careful hands and kissed her. Slow, certain, full of promise. When they parted, his eyes held a question. "Come home with me properly tomorrow?" Verity smiled, heart full. "Yes." They set brunch for 10 a.m. Saturday with his sister in their inner circle, marking the start of their new order. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, standing in the soft hallway light, Verity let herself feel the weight of all they'd survived, all they'd built, all they'd become together. The house settled around them, secure and steady. Somewhere below, night staff moved through their routines. Security cameras tracked movement at the gates. Everything was as it should be, safe, controlled, protected. Verity touched the simple ring on her finger, remembering that first night when she'd chosen the lesser danger. She hadn't known then that she was choosing her future, her partner, her home, that the man who'd claimed her to end her humiliation would become the one who crowned her with trust and authority. Kane's thumb traced her cheekbone, tender in a way that still startled her. This was the truth of him. The control and the care, the violence and the gentleness, all contained in the same careful hands. She leaned into his touch, accepting all of it, choosing all of him. The clock in the hall chimed the half-hour, marking time in measured beats. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight they stood in the quiet aftermath of victory, letting peace settle around them like a mantle. Sunlight streamed through the solarium's glass walls as Verity arranged fresh crullers on a silver tray. The pastry's cardamom scent mingled with rich coffee, creating an atmosphere of warmth and comfort that belied the meeting's gravity. At precisely 10:09 a.m., Kane's inner circle filed in. His sister Marina, Armand, Eliseo, and the newly elevated captains. Verity noted how they automatically deferred to her chosen seating arrangement, accepting her authority in these domestic spheres. First, Kane began, his hand finding Verity's. Beneath the table, we establish clear boundaries between legitimate operations and gray areas. The bakery will be completely clean, no exceptions. Verity nodded, spreading blueprints across the table. The flagship location will operate under Viscari Hospitality Group. We'll focus on hiring women from at-risk backgrounds and veterans seeking civilian careers. Training programs? Marina asked, leaning forward with interest. Full apprenticeships, Verity confirmed, plus health insurance and childcare assistance. We give them real skills, real futures. Kane's thumb traced circles on her palm as she spoke. His pride in her vision was obvious, but he let her own the room. They spent an hour detailing logistics, funding structures, security protocols, vetting processes. When the last detail was settled, the others departed, leaving Verity and Kane alone in the sunlit space. Now, he said softly, us. They discussed this part privately, but speaking it aloud made it real. Truth always, Verity began, even when it's difficult. Respect, Kane continued, for boundaries, choices, independence. Shared power, they said together and smiled at the synchronicity. Later that afternoon, Verity lost herself in the familiar rhythm of cake assembly. The kitchen's stainless steel surfaces reflected her movements as she built tiers and piped delicate borders. Kane found her there, setting his holstered gun on a clean counter before approaching. Teaching me to frost? He asked, eyeing her piping bag. If you're brave enough to try, she teased, demonstrating the proper grip. His hands, so deadly in other contexts, were almost comically careful with the delicate equipment. Frosting smeared his fingers as he attempted a simple shell border. I destroy things, he admitted quietly, but not with you, never with you. I know. Verity guided his hands, showing him how to apply gentle, even pressure. You're lethal to the world and gentle only to me. Yes. The word was rough with emotion. She set down the piping bag and faced him. Then here are my vows. I choose your protection over false safety, your honesty over comfortable lies, your complexity over simple answers. His breath caught. Verity. The evening transformed the kitchen into a gallery of copper and shadow. The restructured council arrived at 7, taking their places at tables arranged like spokes around the central head table. Verity wore deep blue silk that matched Kane's tie, a subtle sign of their unity. Throughout dinner, she felt the weight of observation. Every interaction was noted, every shared glance interpreted. She understood what they saw, not just their Don's wife, but his equal, someone who could both charm and command, who knew both ledgers and logistics. When the plates were cleared, Kane stood. My wife, he said simply, but the words carried weight. My partner, my queen. The council raised their glasses. In their eyes, Verity saw not just acceptance, but relief. Their leader had found someone who balanced him, who could shield while she shone. After the guests departed, they walked to the chapel. Its stained glass cast jeweled shadows across the floor, where Armand and Eliseo waited. Private vows, Kane explained. Just for us. Verity's throat tightened as she faced him. I choose you, she began. Daily, hourly, in crisis and calm. I choose your strength and your struggle, your power and your pain. I choose you, Kane echoed. Your brilliance and your kindness, your steel and your softness. I choose to be worthy of your trust, your touch, your heart. Their witnesses signed the private document with reverence, understanding its significance. This wasn't about legality. They were already married. This was about choice, about commitment freely given. At 1 a.m., they stepped onto the terrace. The city sprawled below, a tapestry of lights and shadows. Verity leaned into Kane's warmth as they discussed plans for a small family ceremony in 2 weeks. Simple, she insisted. Just those who matter. Whatever you want. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Though you deserve a crown. I have something better, she smiled up at him. I have purpose. The night air carried hints of river and rain. Below them, cars traced patterns through streets that belonged to them in different ways now. His through power, hers through protection, theirs through partnership. They stayed there, watching their city, until the stars faded and dawn began painting the horizon in pearl and gold. Tomorrow would bring papers to sign, announcements to make, a new chapter to begin. But this moment belonged to them alone. The dawn and his queen, the protector and his shield, choosing each other in the quiet hours before morning. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner storefront as Verity smoothed her navy blazer. Her hands were steady as she signed the incorporation papers, making Verity's haven official. Kane's signature followed, his fountain pen precise and deliberate. The space hummed with possibility. Gleaming counters, warm wooden floors, and walls painted the color of fresh cream. A line of women waited outside, their faces a mix of hope and hesitation. Verity had insisted on open interviews, wanting transparency from the start. Ready? Kane asked quietly. She squared her shoulders. Always. The first applicant entered, a former convict who'd learned baking in prison. Her hands shook as she presented her portfolio of recipe modifications for institutional kitchens. Verity recognized the intelligence behind the adaptations. When can you start? She asked, and watched joy break across the woman's face. More followed, a veteran with PTSD who found peace in precise measurements, a survivor of domestic violence who'd hidden her talent for years, a recovering addict whose hands steadied when working with chocolate. Verity hired them all, seeing beyond their past to their potential. Cameras arrived at 11, their presence carefully orchestrated. Verity spoke without scripts, her words carrying the weight of lived experience. Everyone deserves dignity, she said, meeting the lenses directly. Everyone deserves the chance to create something beautiful. Kane stood beside her, his presence both protective and proud. When reporters asked about security concerns, he simply gestured to the contractors measuring for specialized glass. My wife's vision includes safety, he said, but not at the expense of welcome. Verity worked with the design team, insisting on details that balanced protection with accessibility. The bullet-resistant glass would be virtually invisible, the security systems discreet. The centerpiece would be a curved display case, positioned to catch morning light. The crullers go here, she directed, pointing to the prime spot. They're what started everything. At noon, a small crowd gathered for the soft opening. Verity handed scissors to her first hire, letting her do the honors. The ribbon fluttered to the floor as applause broke out. A young woman approached the counter, her eyes downcast. Her hands twisted nervously as she ordered a cruller. When Verity smiled and called her ma'am, her blush spoke volumes about being treated with respect. While the new staff handled the lunch rush, Kane met with his legal team in the office upstairs. They reviewed cooperation agreements that would help dismantle Quinto's network while protecting their legitimate enterprises. Verity could hear the low murmur of voices as she moved between kitchen and counter, already falling into the rhythm of operations. She checked inventory, adjusted schedules, and started planning seasonal specials. Her staff watched and learned, not just recipes, but confidence. By mid-afternoon, they were working like a team, calling orders and sharing tips. As sunset painted the windows gold, whispers reached them about Kane. Going soft. Some said marriage had weakened him, others claimed Verity had tamed the dawn. Kane's smile when he heard was razor-sharp. Let them talk, he said, helping Verity close up. They'll learn. Because softness wasn't weakness. It was choosing where to plant roots, how to grow strong. Kane hadn't gone soft. He'd found his center, his anchor, his home. Later that night, their private kitchen was warm with vanilla and cardamom. Flour dusted Verity's cheek, and Kane's tie hung loose around his neck as they shared the first slice of celebration cake. "Too sweet?" she asked, watching his face. "Perfect," he said, then smiled. "Like everything you make." They discussed the small ceremony planned for 2 weeks ahead. Just family, just truth. No politics, no showing off, no grand gestures needed. They'd already built their foundation on choices made in crisis, promises kept under pressure. Verity wrote out prep lists for tomorrow while Kane reviewed security logs. The normalcy of it felt like luxury, her practical. Planning beside his protective vigilance, their different strengths aligned. "Early start tomorrow," she said, posting the list on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a whisk. "I'll have coffee ready," he promised. The calendar on the wall showed their wedding date, circled in red, but every day leading to it mattered just as much. Each morning would bring new challenges: training staff, building trust, balancing books that stayed clean and true. They knew there would be threats. The city wasn't done testing them, but anyone who thought to reach for Verity would learn exactly why Kane's gentleness with her made his capacity for violence more terrifying, not less. He hadn't gone soft. He'd found something worth protecting with all his considerable power. In their bedroom, Verity kicked off her shoes while Kane hung his jacket. The day settled around them like sifted sugar, sweet with accomplishment. "Proud of you," he said quietly. She touched his face. "Proud of us." Because that's what they'd built. Not just a marriage or a business, but a partnership that balanced light and shadow, strength and sweetness, protection and purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had this: flour-dusted hands and loosened ties, a prep list on the fridge, and a date on the calendar, and the absolute certainty that they'd chosen well when they chose each other.